Assalamualaikum and a very good day to all. I am Dr. Nur Fatimah Yahya, will be your coordinator for this module in Environmental and Occupational Toxicology. So a little bit introduction about me. I am a senior lecturer in Advanced Medical and Dental Institute, and my subject area is in analytical chemistry, specifically in the separation technology, green sample preparation strategies, material science, food and environmental analysis, biomedical and pharmaceutical chemistry. Alright, so moving on to this roadmap of this course TMT 501 on the environmental and occupational toxicology, we will have 8 modules. So this module will cover on the Module 1, Introduction to Environmental Toxicology. Alright, for the course mapping, under this course TMT 501, Module 01, the course learning outcome are number 1 and number 2, by which the number 1 is to analyze the toxicant in the environment and the workplace in the aspects of source of exposure, clinical manifestation, medical management and legislation. And for the course learning outcome number 2 is to associate the toxicant in the environment and at workplace with their source of exposure, clinical manifestation, medical management and legislation. Alright, for this module, we will have 4 parts. The first part is on the introduction and definition in environmental toxicology. For the second part, you will be briefed on we will discuss on plant toxin. And part 3 will discuss on the animal or insect toxin. And the last part in this module will be comprised of marine life toxin. Alright, for the learning outcomes, upon completion of this module, you should be able to demonstrate first is the definition of environmental toxicology as a field, knowledge of basic principle of environmental toxicology and its applicability, and understanding in the sources of chemicals in the environment, including from plant, animal, and marine life. Alright, moving on to the introduction to the environmental toxicology, the definition. So what is toxicology? Toxicology is the study of harmful effects of agent on people, animal, and other living organisms. So as you all know, toxicology is the study of the poison, okay, the science of the poison. So one aspect of toxicology is to evaluate the adverse effects that will occur under the specific chemical exposure scenarios, for example, that is referred to the risk assessment. So, toxicology is a combination of biology and chemistry with element of physical and computational sciences that leads to wide variety of career opportunities. So the field of toxicology provides the excitement of science and research while contributing to the well-being of current and future generations. So this toxicology or environmental toxicology can be defined as the study of the impacts of pollutants upon the structure and function of ecological system. So, environmental toxicology focuses on the impact of pollutants in the environment on biological organisms and non-human, for example, fish, bird, terrestrial animals, and etc. So, what about toxin? What is toxin and toxicant? What is the difference between toxin and toxicant? Toxin is the poisons that produced within the living cells or organs of plant, animal, or bacteria. And toxicants are synthetic. It is human-made of toxic chemicals. So these are different between toxin and toxicant. So these are the important terms that will be introduced in this module. The next is the toxicity in our life. So toxicity in our daily life is not an uncommon term. For example, we have pesticides and heavy metals in foods, fruits, bisphenol compounds in canned foods, heavy metals in paints and parabens in cosmetics. So we have to do some research or the monitoring of this compound throughout from time to time to ensure the safety of human and other living organisms in the ecosystem. So let's move to environmental toxicology and some of its components. So the broad scope of environmental toxicology requires a multidisciplinary approach of a variety of scientists. So as you see in the figure that I have shown to you, we have wildlife biology, analytical chemistry, genomic, pharmacokinetics, physiology, risk assessment people, meteorology, ecology, marine biology, and so on. So these specialists, they interact with a variety of other persons' decision and with the policymakers, the public, educators, and other key individuals in making decisions about the management of ecological systems. So this broad of scope of environmental toxicology and its application as a management tool make the field both a basic and an applied field of study. So environmental toxicology takes and assimilates from a variety of disciplines. Alright, so for example, terrestrial and aquatic ecologists, chemists, molecular biologists, genetics, geneticists, and mathematicians are all important in the evaluation of the impacts of the substance or chemicals on the biological system. So in this slide, I've been selected some of the toxicologies of the toxicology categories. We can divide it into ecology, for example. They provides the basis of our ability to interpret the interactions of species in ecosystem and the impact that toxicants may have upon the function and structure of a particular ecosystem. So I hope you still remember the definitions of toxin and toxicant. Toxins are naturally made and toxicants are the man-made chemicals, toxic compounds. Alright, now look at number 2, molecular biology and pharmacokinetics operate at the opposite ends of the biological hierarchy. They describe the interaction of an organism with a toxicant at the molecular level. So they elaborate on the interaction at the molecular level. For analytical chemists or analytical chemistry, they provide data on the environmental concentration, especially for monitoring of the compound that can be used to estimate the dose to an organism when the tissue are analyzed. And what about the organic chemistry? They provide the basic language of both the abiotic and biotic interaction within an ecosystem. And mathematical and computer modeling, they are very important to enable the researcher to predict the effects and to increase the rigor of a hypothesis. Okay, there are many factors that can affect the toxicity. Alright, the first is the period or time of exposure. So what is the meaning of these terms, period or time of exposure? For example, we have acute toxicity. There came from single period of time or very brief period of time, for example, 1 to 14 days. And for subchronic, the toxicity that from continuous or repeated exposure from week to several months, for example, 14 to 365 days. And for the chronic toxicity that from exposure for a long period of time or lifetime. The next factor that can affect the toxicity is the sources of exposure, from where the toxicant came from, for example, air, water, salts, or any other substances. How about the route of exposure? For example, point of diffuse source, occupational exposure, or the food chain contamination. Subject susceptibility is also important. The concentrations of those, for example, higher concentration, low concentration, chemical substances, the solubility properties of the toxic compound is also play a role in the toxicity. And chemical interaction, whether this chemical or the toxic compound can interact with other substances, whether it can increase or decrease the toxicity, are also important in determining the toxicity effect. For the toxicity testing, we have dose response curve. So this curve or this graph describes the response of an enzyme, organism, population or biological community to a range of concentration of xenobiotics. So this the x-axis is the dose or the concentration, weight, alright, and the y-axis is the total percent that at each dose. So this is what we call dose response curve. Alright, for the ADME process, the process of how this substance of this compound or the toxic compound react in our body. So this process comprises absorption, how the mechanism or the pharmacokinetics of this compound from the absorption to the distribution, metabolism, and excretion. Alright, for the absorption, the first one is, for example, this toxic compound A. So how will the toxic compound A enter the body? From the absorption? Is it from the absorption where it can penetrate through our skin and then goes inside the body? For the distribution, how this toxic compound A will go or will enter in the body? Is it any targeted organs? All right, and then metabolism is to describe how this substance broken down into its other analogues or derivatives. And for the excretion, it describes the process on how this toxic compound A exit the body. All right. These are the references that I use to prepare this module, so you can find these references. All right, I think that's all from me for this part 1 of the module. Thank you very much and see you next time in the part 2 of this module. Bye bye. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.